Our guest today is Andrea Molina, who is the Veteran Services and Vet-to-Vet Director for Family Services of Westchester. She served in the United States Marine Corps active duty from November 2001 to November 2005 as an electrician, attaining the rank of sergeant. During her military career, Andrea was stationed at Cherry Point, North Carolina. She deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom from February to August 2003, and again from February to September in 2005. While deployed, Andrea was billeted as the engineer platoon sergeant doing base security and convoy security. And from 2006 to 2008, Andrea served in the 6th Communication Battalion in Brooklyn as an electrician. She was awarded an Iraqi Campaign Medal, Good Conduct Medal, the Naval Unit Citation, and the Presidential Unit Citation. She received her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Economics from SUNY Empire State College and an MBA from Fordham University. The title of her talk today is Veteran Peer Suicide Prevention. Please welcome Mrs. Molina to the podium.
Thanks so much. This right here. Some notes on here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate the invitation. So the reason I involved myself in peer support for suicide prevention was because I myself, being a peer, struggled with suicidal ideation. When you lose a sense of purpose, your family, in essence, because when you join the military and you are placed in very difficult situations, those around you become your family, your support system, your lifeline, the reason why you live. Some people are under the misconception that when military personnel are deployed, their purpose is to kill and to involve themselves in combat, when in reality, a huge portion of veterans see their own as family. A lot of people come from broken homes. There's a saying in the Marine Corps, if you don't come from a broken home, then you're not really a Marine. So therefore, you find that missing link in your life in the military, your purpose. So the connection is so deep. You know who's coming at you in the dark just by the way they walk. That's how much you get to know the person. The way they smell, the sound of their voice. That's how the connection it's embedded in you, especially during combat. So when you lose that family, it's traumatic. And going back to my original purpose for bringing that up is when you're in combat, truly and honestly, the main goal for a lot of us is for the person to the left and right of you to come home, more so than yourself for a lot of us, right? You don't want to experience that loss of that newfound family member passing before your eyes. I think that's the biggest fear that you have during combat. I myself, when I used to say my little prayers, that was number one. And number two was, if I have to go, if something happens, I don't want to be left, I want to be left handicapped physically. What I didn't realize was that I was left somewhat handicapped emotionally and psychologically. It took me a very long time to calibrate myself. It took me about 10 years. I didn't speak to my family, my brothers and my mother for over 10 years after 2005. It was a very difficult road. So I knew that I needed to do something for those that were completely lost. And I think for women it's a bit easier to talk about things and seek help. I know for a fact, being in an engineer platoon and the only female, men don't have that gift, I guess. A lot of men are not quick to seek help. They're warriors. They isolate. They keep everything inside. A lot of men don't know how to verbalize what's going on. I had that issue for a very long time. What is going on with me? Why am I here? I felt like I was a ghost. I survived Iraq, I'm here, but my body, my spirit is still in Iraq. And I felt like I passed away. A part of myself passed away. The person that left before combat is no more, and I mourn that person. And I used to wake up every morning thinking, oh, one day I'm going to be that person again. And there was the biggest issue in my life. I was never that same person. And believe it or not, I had to go through a mourning process. I was in denial, and finally I let it go. I was not the same person that grew up in White Plains, New York. I was a different individual. And I was an ugly individual, and then I was an okay individual, and now I'm still working through it. I don't believe there is such a thing as getting over it and healing all the way. The trauma of war, it will leave you a scar, so you will never be the same person. All right, so on to my presentation. So as a director of the Vet to Vet with Family Service, I found that the veterans in our area, their biggest issues is, of course, number one, suicide prevention, trauma, PTSD, because suicide and PTSD are not exclusive. Some people believe that they are. That's not necessarily true. So trauma could manifest in many different ways. Addiction, I like to call them phobias, isolation, and then also criminal justice. So I'll tell you what, when I came home, I couldn't sleep. I was a zombie. As soon as, I don't know if you all remember Friday the 13th, where you close your eyes and you're back there again. That's what it felt for me. As soon as I fell asleep, I was back there again. I found myself in the kitchen low crawling. Oh, thank you.
It's not. Sorry. I thought it was going to be brighter on the screen. But anyway, sorry.
Okay, no problem. So what ended up happening is, since I couldn't sleep, I started hallucinating. And holding a job was very difficult. So I started drinking. And guess what? Getting behind the wheel. And I was really not thinking. I could have killed so many people. And I could have also killed whoever was with me in the car, thinking back. So I had a lot of issues with drinking, driving, violence, anger. I would go out and, Army's better than Marine Corps, even though I'm a woman, that never held me back. I used to frequent the watering holes where a lot of veterans used to congregate in the Bronx, and anger was one of the issues I definitely had. And then housing and homelessness, but I feel like everyone has that issue. I just think that it compiles as a veteran when you can't find employment, when you can't reintegrate, when you are not a whole person anymore, and you refuse to get help because you're a warrior and you can get yourself together and you will be okay, you will be the same person eventually. So all those things make it difficult to find employment and eventually, of course, housing. Oh, it doesn't want to work. Okay, so the reason I bring up who qualifies as a veteran is because with all these issues that come up, if you are not considered a veteran under the VA, you do not qualify for mental health services. If you are dishonorably discharged, you cannot use the VA or their mental health services unless you have an other than honorable. At the beginning of, I think it was, at the end of last year, they changed that where you can use their mental health services if you have an other than honorable. So if you can't use the mental health services, it's and I'll tell you from experience, I tried to use a mental therapist outside the VA, and it was very difficult for that person to relate to the issues I had. So usually you have more experienced individuals in the issues of war and trauma within the VA. So those that are dishonorably discharged are basically left to the wayside. And let me explain something. Dishonorable discharge doesn't mean that you necessarily mean you are a horrible individual. You have a lot of individuals that deployed back to back to back. I know a guy that deployed 6 times between Iraq and Afghanistan. They develop a drinking habit still in service, and they do the wrong thing, and they get kicked out, and there goes their dishonorable discharge, which may not necessarily be of their own fault. It could be whatever trauma they have experienced. All right, so the media brought to attention back in 2010 the 22 suicides a day. Currently, they're saying that the rate is now 20 a day. As you could see, people believe that suicide was, after this was brought to light, it was exclusive to every combat veteran, when in fact, it's not. The highest rates are, after the Iraq-Afghanistan war, as I noted on there. In 2012, PFC Dwyer is a veteran. He was a combat medic, and he took his life by mistake, as his family stated. He was a combat medic, and he had several deployments to Iraq. He came home. He developed an addiction to painkillers and alcohol. He was depressed, and he did suffer suicidal ideations, but according to his family, he overdosed by mistake. He called his sister and said, "I need your help," and by the time she got there, he had passed. That event inspired his family to create the PFC Dwyer program, which is a peer program. His family felt that another veteran could have perhaps saved his life. And that's where the grass movements of peer-to-peer suicide prevention was started. Nowadays, the VA has decided to implement the peer program. The only issue with the VA's peer program was that they wanted to incorporate a peer program that was dedicated only to drug addiction and alcoholism, and really didn't deal with mental health issues. And when I say mental health issues, it could be depression, anxiety, PTSD. Those are considered mental health issues. A lot of people don't realize that that's actually a mental health issue. Some of the risk factors that we look for in veterans, of course, mental health disorders, and that would be probably left up to a therapist, but as peers, we recognize hopelessness, seasonal variation, believe it or not, during Christmas, wintertime. Veterans are definitely, their depression levels go up. They're lonely, and they've isolated, and they've cut off their families like I did so well. And that definitely elevates suicidal ideation. Physical illness, I'm only 43, but I have arthritis everywhere. It's horrible. So that also helps with the idea of suicide. I know a man, he's 38, and he walks with a cane. He used to be a paratrooper. His back is gone. He has to use a handicap parking. He needs help getting out of the bed, using the bathroom just to sit down. That's not really a quality of life for some individuals, especially if at one point in your life you were considered this godlike warrior, and now you are a broken human being. Our program thinks about every aspect of suicide ideation. Where I felt when I came home, the resources that should have been offered to me weren't. And I feel that when you don't cover all bases, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you don't cover housing, if you don't cover sense of purpose, self-esteem, you are never going to really attack the issue of suicide, especially for a service member. We talk about what is really going on with you. The reason why you feel this way could be these things, and a lot of people know it but don't want to verbalize it and don't want to bring it up to surface. Hey, I'm homeless, I can't find work, I feel worthless. I was an infantryman. I know a couple of gentlemen that are in their early 30s, they don't know how to use a computer because they went from high school straight into an infantry job. They never sat in front of a computer. They can't be bothered. So employment is very difficult. So outreach and education is very important. Of course, our peer support. We build resilience. If I did it, you could do it too. I'm just a woman. You're a guy. You could do it. So that's my motto. That's my punchline. We encourage connection among family members and friends. That's where we go back to the education piece. We try to incorporate family and kind of educate family and friends on the traumas of war, on the traumas of PTSD, suicidal ideation, and not necessarily combat-related trauma as well. People do 20 years in the military, come back, and can't assimilate. So it's nice to let family members know what's really going on. We also provide suicide intervention or prevention. We are not the end-all be-all. We are not professionals, but I've driven people to professionals, trusted professionals. I could tell you how many therapists I went through in the VA that were completely disconnected, out of touch, and they were like this the whole time. And I'm like, I'm not coming back here. And I had to go through several therapists to realize, hey, there is someone that cares and is in tune. So driving people home to the therapist and connecting them with the right type of therapist is crucial for suicide prevention, especially if you've been on the other side. And we foster hope. This too shall pass was my favorite saying when I was in Iraq. I used to carry a little card some nonprofit group mailed me out there, and I used to carry it in my pocket. And whenever I thought this was it, I used to just touch my little card, and I knew that this too shall pass. And I also remind people home, you know, this is not the end. This too shall pass, and we will move to our next stage, whether you like it or not. No, I'm kidding. I can't say that. So right now, the PFC Dwyer program is a 5-year research program. They are actually studying the effect of peer-to-peer in the role of suicide prevention. I report every month on hospitalization and progress of veterans. So there is no research evidence right now, but it is in progress. The whole idea of a peer, and I'm going to move this over, the whole idea of the whole peer suicide is just to minimize the isolation, the loneliness, the shame, and through my program, I incorporated housing services and employment, resume writing. I felt that was just so important because the doctors were completely overlooking, and the VA was completely overlooking those very important details. How do I get back? How do I navigate back into the civilian system? And that's so crucial with suicide prevention. And same thing for family members. A lot of family members were stationed with their service member out in like Alaska, and they also have difficulty readjusting. So let's say my husband was with me. He's of no help either because he was out there with me. So basically, that's what we're trying to incorporate in the suicide prevention. Believe it or not, a lot of people overlook these basic needs. All right, I'm just gonna. So right now, there is a gap between the military and our civilian society. I feel like everyone gets their information from Facebook and movies and social media. I remember this saying, America's not at war, the Marine Corps is at war. America's at the mall. There's a huge misconnect with our society and the military, and I feel also in politics. And I feel like that's perhaps why there's such a gap. We're not involved. We are completely alienating ourselves from, and I'm not saying everyone, but a huge portion of people are deciding not to become involved in politics and issues with the military. But hey, listen, I joined the military right after 9/11. I used to work at One World Trade, and I was fortunate enough to have the day off. And after that, the next day, September 12th, I signed up, active duty, and left. I was a 26-year-old woman. I was very old. I used to be called the grand old lady of the Marine Corps. People join at 18. So I was under the misconception, and I was emotionally driven, that we would help protect our way of life, when in fact that was completely not true. In retrospect, I feel, in my own opinion, that we should have never been in Iraq. But then again, if people don't take action at home, what are we to do? I had a woman say, "Oh, you're proud of what you did? You went to Iraq. Do you really feel proud about that?" And I said, "Well, you're partially also guilty, because had people at home not held politicians accountable, we would not be in Iraq. If people weren't involved, we wouldn't be being deployed to these places. We don't have that choice. We don't have that luxury. If I say I'm not going to Iraq, I'm going to be thrown in jail. And I'm going to have a very hard time coming home, because I'm going to have a dishonorable discharge. And no one's going to hire me, because that's a lot of the issues that we face now with dishonorably discharged vets. They can't find employment. So I think education and information is key. I feel that citizens, again, if you educate and inform yourself on veterans issues, on military issues, one day that could be a family member of yours joining the military. I think it's crucial that everyone find out what really is going on in policies around them, and as well for military and veterans. Because honestly, how many people are going to raise their hand if stuff hits the fan? Very few, without questions asked. You can't have a contract and stipulate, I will not go to Iraq because I don't feel that we shouldn't be there, right? So I think as citizens, we really need to become more aware, seek more information and education, accountability for politicians, from legislators to senators, funding for mental health for veterans care. That's very important as well. Believe it or not, even though I was crippled at one point in time, emotionally, physically, somewhat, and psychologically, I pulled myself out of it, and I went and I got my MBA. I had to do my undergrad online because I couldn't deal with people, period. I could not leave my house. I was paralyzed. It was like a phobia. And finally, I worked through it, and I went all the way down to Lincoln Center, getting on the Metro North, getting squished on a subway, suffering panic attacks, anxiety attacks, getting to the classroom and just a ball of sweat. People were like, "You want to sit in that corner?" And it would sit away from me. And shaking, I have tremors, and people used to be like, "Put that weirdo back there." But I worked through that, and I got to tell you, I feel like I'm back to contributing back to society with a little bit of an oomph, because now I know. I was in combat, I saw a lot of things, and I think it helps to contribute to society. So if we invest in our veterans, believe you me, your veterans are definitely going to give you more than expected. And taking action. It's nice to inform yourself and want to hold your politicians accountable, but you must walk the walk. And that's all I have for you all. Thank you so much for having me.